We are absolutely thrilled to be bringing you this industry's first robotic data automation, Fabric and AIOps conference. We are streaming live from the beautiful Tri-Valley. Livermore Valley is one of the oldest wine regions in the country, even older than Napa. And if you stay towards the end of the conference, we can certainly embark on a virtual wine tour. Okay? Thanks for joining us again. We have a stellar lineup of speakers, almost 30 speakers across 8 sessions. Let's begin. So my name is Shailesh Manjrekar. I'm the Vice President of AI and Marketing here at CloudFabrix. CloudFabrix is one of the sponsors of this conference along with Global Big Data Conference. I'm also a Forbes Technology Council member. So as I said, we have a stellar lineup of industry thought leaders and luminaries throughout the day to give you an 360-degree views of what we mean by robotic data automation fabric and their perspective and vision around the data challenges and the data solutions. So in next 15 minutes or so, I will give you an overall overview of the conference, what are the major areas of focus. So this presentation is divided into 3 parts. We'll talk about how we define autonomous enterprise. We'll talk about what are the challenges faced by this autonomous enterprise. And finally, we'll talk about how these challenges are mitigated with robotic data automation fabric and AIOps. Every enterprise, small, medium, and large, aspires to be an autonomous enterprise. What does that really mean? From an CXO's perspective, he is looking at reducing his risk. And what that means, he needs to be able to predict and prevent outages and security breaches. He wants to optimize his operations. He wants to improve his productivity by means of lights out operations. He wants to build a composable business in the face of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty going on in the world right now with COVID-19, with several wars on the horizon and so on. He wants to be able to enable data governance and compliance. He wants to build trust in his AI operations. And then finally, he wants to be able to deepen his customer insights and the customer experience. However, autonomous enterprise is not a destination. It's really a journey. We have identified at least there are 4 different levels of autonomy in this journey. So level 1 is really a descriptive phase where you're taking a stock of all your IT assets, application assets, and business assets. It's really about taking an inventory and being able to do diagnostics on those inventory as to has anything broken, is everything working in line, and so on and so forth. The next level of autonomy is predictive autonomy, where you are able to do what-if analysis. You are able to observe those assets and you are able to look at trends and you are able to predict anomalies. The third level of autonomy is really prescriptive, which is where now that you know what-if analysis, what's the action you are going to take on virtue of this. Okay? And the fourth one is really cognitive, where all of this intelligence becomes part of your information systems. So those are the 4 levels of different autonomy levels as we envisage an enterprise embarking on. So what does that mean? What does an enterprise really need to do in order to get there? So it's 3 simple things. First and foremost, there need to be a data first strategy. There needs to be an AI first strategy, and there needs to be an automate everywhere strategy. What data first strategy does is it provides you context, it provides you the intent behind the actions. The AI first strategy provides you insights, and then finally the automate everywhere strategy provides you the action which is required to enable your autonomous journey. And as you proceed through these different levels, you are able to work through these levels of autonomy across your processes, across people and resources, right? So what that means is you are able to infuse AI in your processes, you are able to close the skills gap with your people, and then finally optimize and better utilize your resources in terms of reducing licensing costs, in terms of consolidating the resources, in terms of better utilizing those resources. So having defined the autonomous enterprise, now let's look at what are the challenges ahead of this autonomous enterprise. So as you folks know, every AI problem is really a data problem, and AIOps is no exception to that. And what has exacerbated this problem is really the data in motion. So with the 5G and the edge computing, the data in motion is expected to be even larger than data at rest. And enterprises are really struggling and scrambling as to how to handle this data in motion. And as a result of that, if you look at the statistics from the analysts, 73% of the data is almost unused for analytics and insights. Predictive models are only using historical data for their modeling, right? And 78% of the CEOs are actually not using data-driven insights because those are actually compartmentalized, they are silos. They don't get a holistic view of the entire organization. What further exacerbates this problem is really there are technology blocks emerging which are more and more distributed. If you look at multi-cloud environments, if you look at Kubernetes, if you look at service meshes, if you look at blockchains, if you look at GPUs, if you look at metaverse and omniverse, these are really distributed applications, and you lose the visibility and the command and control used to have in your monolithic stack. Furthermore, the organizations or the verticals who are adopting these technology stacks, they're regulated industries. They have social impact, and it's absolutely mandatory to be able to govern and be able to comply to this particular requirements which are mandated for a regulated industry. And that's what really makes operationalizing and democratizing AI and data extremely difficult. So these are some of the challenges faced by autonomous enterprise. If you were to summarize this, the gist of the problem is really what the industry calls data value gap. And what we mean by that is the organization or the enterprise is collecting data across the board, and it's collecting it throughout these data silos. But very little data is actually actionable and can be used. So according to Accenture, only 32% of that data is really able to realize value, which is really actionable. According to Forrester, almost 60 to 70% is unused. And why is that? There are at least 3 reasons which contribute to this. First and foremost is the poor data quality. Enterprises are almost spending 80% of the time in transforming that data, in contextualizing that data, and enriching that data before that data can be used. The second challenge is the skills gap and really C-level sponsorship for these kind of projects. So the data value chain was really the most neglected part within the value chain, right? So people have been observing and monitoring applications, infrastructure, and platform. Data was the part which was really, it was not looked at. It was really the stepchild, and now is the time to actually look at data in this data economy. And the third challenge is around siloed and slow and historical data sources, right? So only 16% say they have agile data sources. And this is what the industry calls the data value gap. So what is CloudFabrix doing about this? So if you look at mobility from yesterday, this was really based on the gas station grid. If you look at mobility today, it's really based on this electric grid. You can't work off the same gas station grid with an electric car or an autonomous car. Similarly, CloudFabrix aspires to support this autonomous enterprise journey by building an AI data grid. And in simplistic terms, robotic data automation fabric is this AI data grid. So with that, I'm introducing to you world's first robotic data automation fabric. And why do we call it world's first? So data fabric is an emerging technology building block which is getting a lot of traction. Gartner has identified it as #1 technology trend for 2022 as well as 2021. However, none of these organizations, there are organizations like Google and IBM and Microsoft endorsing data fabric and the value it brings, but none of them are actually leveraging it for AIOps and operationalizing these data pipelines. So robotic data automation fabric takes those challenges, what we outlined, those 3 challenges head on. And how do we do that? So the first challenge we outlined was the ability to actually prepare the data and automate that data. So with Robotic Data Automation Fabric, we are able to actually provide this data automation pipelines and be able to route that data, contextualize that data, enrich that data, such that the data is really usable and actionable for further AI processing. So that's the first challenge how we handle with Robotic Data Automation Fabric. The second challenge, which is about the skills gap, so we handle that through a self-service, no-code ID environment with data bots. So we have about a marketplace of 800 plus data bots. Think of them as 800 digital workers at your disposal. And this number is growing as we speak, right? It's growing by leaps and bounds. And what that does is even a citizen developer and non-domain user is able to build these pipelines very easily and be able to leverage it for your IT and business purposes. And the third challenge we talked about is about data silos. So what does CloudFabrix do about it? So we leverage data silo at the edge and in the cloud to be able to provide this, what we call in-place analytics. So rather than bringing data to the intelligence, we take intelligence to the data. Okay, and the data fabric is able to provide this now holistic view, being able to tee up all the data sources across your organization, whether they are geographically dispersed, they are multi-cloud, and so on and so forth. All of this is built upon top of our cfxCloud, which is a super cloud built on top of one of the hyperscalers. We can run it across multiple hyperscalers, okay, and that brings in a very seamless onboarding experience. The data fabric itself is based on an open source framework called nats.io, which is a low message passing MOM, what we call message oriented middleware. And it's been well tested, well executed, well hardened in the field, and there are several big organizations using that streaming underlying fabric. So that's what we mean by Robotic Data Automation Fabric. So observe your pipelines, operationalize them, and then finally automate them. And on top of this cfxCloud, we have these several services, just like you would see services with AWS Cloud. The other important aspect or a differentiator what we do is this concept around explainable AI. Everybody wants to bring in AI into their processes and their resources. However, people are not willing to trust AI. So how do you bring that trust is primarily defined by this explainable AI framework. We provide transparency to all the AI operations we conduct. We provide security all the way from data collection, all the way to the data pipelines. We provide integrity and the reproducibility of those experiments, such that now you have complete 360 degrees view of your data pipelines or your AI pipelines. And this is what we call explainability. Not to mention, we leverage all kind of learnings when we are implementing AI pipelines, whether it is unsupervised learning, because every customer environment is different. So we have mechanisms to collect data pertaining to that particular environment, quickly train the AI pipelines with either unsupervised or reinforcement learning, and then make those actionable decisions. We also support supervised and federated and transfer learning. And at the same time, we are also able to leverage open source frameworks like OpenAI, IBM Watson, Hugging Face, and transformers like GPT-3 and Gopher. So with that, I have painted the vision around autonomous enterprise and how CloudFabrix can handhold you pretty much in every of those autonomy level, right from moving your data swarms to data fabric and be able to do data discovery, moving from data monitoring to data observability, moving from model ops and ML ops, which are not really domain centric, to moving to AIOps, which is really domain centric, and also moving from automation to hyper automation. And clearly we realize that we can't do all of this by ourselves. So we have a very strong ecosystem, and you'll be hearing from some of those partners today, strategic partners, SIs and MSPs, as to what their vision and how they are working with us. And then clearly cfxCloud is a self-service self-service cloud which is powered by robotic data automation. So with that, I'll conclude my session, and we have a lineup of almost 30 speakers throughout the day, divided across almost 8 sessions, and these are all panel conversations, so they are going to be extremely entertaining. So please stick around towards the end. And with that, I will hand over to my next speakers, right? So these are actually analysts, industry analysts, who will be sharing their vision around what they mean by robotic data automation fabric. So in this particular section, we have 3 speakers, and then following that, we have other industry leaders, whether they are end users, they are customers, they are SIs, MSPs, across the board. Thank you very much.